Alrighty guys, so the secret to getting cinematic drone footage is to actually use filters, and we're going to check out the Freewell filter kit today for the Mavic Mini and Mavic Mini 2. How's it going there? My name is Andrew Murphy from Down Under in Gold Coast, Australia. So if you're a Mavic Mini 1 or Mini 2 owner and use manual settings, then you know how vital filters are, specifically ND filters are, to capturing cinematic footage. But if you're not aware what ND filters do, they're basically kind of like, I guess, sunglasses for your camera. So basically when you put them on, they let a little bit less light into the lens, so it basically darkens down the image and allows you to crank your shutter to get some really nice motion blur. And in this Freewell kit, there is actually 8 filters here. I'm gonna run through all of them and tell you exactly what they do and where you can use them. Now, like I said before, the secret to getting that nice cinematic drone footage is to have your shutter speed twice what your frame rate is. So for instance, I'm gonna be shooting at 25 frames a second because I'm here in Australia. So the optimal shutter speed to get the best looking image would be 1/50th of a second. And the reason this gives the most cinematic look is because it gives us the optimal amount of motion blur that our eyes are actually used to seeing in just everyday life. But if we were to just grab our drone without any filters and dial in these settings, majority of the time your image is going to be very, very bright, very overexposed, and that is because the camera is letting in way too much light at these settings. Now, if you were to use these settings during, say, like golden hour or blue hour, then your image might look pretty good without actual filters on there, but because there's a lot less light in the sky, it works. So to fix this issue of being too overexposed every other time, we basically need ND filters, which are going to cut the amount of light coming in and hitting our camera sensor. Now, the exact ND filter that you're going to need will depend on 2 factors. It'll be the time of the day that you're actually shooting and also the environment that you're going to be shooting in. So for example, if you're going to be shooting down the beach, it's probably going to be very, very bright if you shoot, say, in the middle of the day. So you're going to need, say, like an ND 16, ND 32 to cut down the amount of light. But if you shot it, say, at sunrise, you're gonna need a hell of a lot less ND to cut down the amount of light, just because there typically isn't as much. Now, a quick way to actually figure out which filter I guess you need is to basically turn on your camera and just grab the filter and just kind of like hold it up in front of the actual camera. It won't kind of work that good, but you should be able to get enough of the filter in there in the shot so you can see what the exposure is like with those particular settings on the actual camera. Now, to actually mount these filters on the Mavic Mini, you need to have the drone off to start with. I did a few tests with it on and it does work, but it just kind of like overheats the gimbal a little bit. So definitely turn it off when you're putting these on. Freewell actually recommends that you start with the bottom edge of the camera. So you just clip on this little portion and then you basically push those little arms behind the camera until it clips into those little cutouts on the back of the camera. And the first few times you do this, it can be a little bit fiddly, like trying to kind of like wedge this behind there and see if the actual little arms are in there and whatnot, but the more you do it, the easier it gets. And I also found that I think pulling up on the filter from the bottom of the camera up is a lot easier to actually take the filters off. Now, because adding a filter onto your camera will add a slight bit of extra weight, I did have a tiny issue. It only actually happened once, but basically because there's a little bit of extra weight, it can unbalance it, and it basically just freaks out and it starts bobbing up and down. And basically the only way I figured out you can stop it is to basically just touch it with your finger until it stops, and then it seems to figure itself out. So hopefully like this doesn't happen mid-flight for you, because I wasn't able to just like crank the camera angle and fix this. But if it does happen, just bring it down, touch it, and it should fix this, hopefully. But again, it only happened once to me, so I don't think it's like a huge issue with the balancing of the gimbal. Now, by far the best part about this Freewell filter kit is that it comes with a ton of different filters for basically like every lighting situation. So you got an ND 4, 8, and 16, and then you got a CPL, and then you got a ND CPL, which is a polarizer and an ND, and that comes in an 8, a 16, a 32, and a 64 as well. Plus it's housed in this like super sweet little metal case with this like hard foam to actually like hold all the filters in there. And honestly, like this is the first Freewell product I've got, and I'm super impressed by the actual like overall quality of their packaging and just like how their filters and stuff look. Like I'm very impressed considering how cheap their products are as well. All right, now if you actually compare having an ND filter on to not having one, but keeping those same cinematic settings, you can clearly see the difference it makes. Like, it's just night and day. And these are some of the images that I've got with the Freewell filters on, and I think it actually looks really good. Like, I haven't seen any color shifts or anything with the filters on to not having them on, so I'm really impressed. Now, an ND filter or neutral density filter just cuts out light, but a polarizer filter removes glare and reflection. So if we throw on the polarizer filter, you can see that on these like windows here, we've actually cut the glare and the reflection off these. And you can also see in the sky as well, it's like darkened it down a bit, and it's given us a little bit more contrast and saturation. And the awesome thing about this set is that if we do have to cut light and also remove glare, we've got those ND-PL filters, which is obviously a neutral density and polarizer, and we can use both of them at the same time. However, keep in mind, because it is a circular polarizer, you do have to actually adjust the polarization on the filter to activate that polarization effect. Now, one thing I did notice on the polarizer filters is that there are some markings, and I assume that the markings should kind of like line up to help you tell when the polarization effect is on. But in my tests, they're not super consistent. Like, I assume that having the markings line up mean that it's either on or off, but sometimes it was on and sometimes it was half on. Like, it wasn't very consistent throughout all the filters in this kit. Now, keep in mind as well, you can actually use the ND-PL filters as just ND filters as well. You just have to obviously rotate the polarizer portion until the polarization effect has been turned off. Now, I tested out each individual filter on just auto mode to see if the camera could actually like pick up any color differences and correct for it. And you can see in the normal mode on the ND filters, the images look basically identical, which is really, really good. By switching from the NDs to the ND-PLs, which is the polarizer, the polarization filter seems to be adding a little bit more warmth, or it's either doing that or removing some of the glare to bring that saturation and that vibrance back. Now, it's worth noting as well, I shot this during midday because I obviously wanted the most amount of light to test out all these filters, but there is a little bit of purple glare, I think just from like the angle of the light. But I also noticed even with the same angle of light and the same kind of like position, the PL filters tended or seem to get rid of that a little bit as well. So I think the PL filters also help with a little bit of flaring. So something to keep in mind. But now if we switch over to manual settings, you can see the effect of adding those ND filters on and how much it actually just decreases the brightness of the overall image. And again, this is what it would look like if we're shooting at midday with those cinematic settings of 1/50th of a second and not using any filters. Then if we add on that ND32PL, it actually corrects it all back so it's perfectly exposed. Now, having that ND64PL in the kit, I think you will very, very rarely use it, but it is nice to have in there just in case you shoot in like a super glary environment and you do need that little bit of extra ND just in case. Now, overall, I'm actually really, really impressed by these filters, considering that they're only $99 US and you get 8 filters in this kit. Like, that is just such good bang for buck. And being able to use these to basically take a cheap drone and make the footage look as good as possible is definitely something that everyone needs to do. So basically, I guess if you have a Mavic Mini or a Mavic Mini 2, highly recommend it. Super duper cool, not gonna break the bank, and it means that you can get those really, really nice motion blur and really, really nice cinematic images. Alright guys, if you did enjoy this one, then consider liking and subscribing. And if you wanna find out any more about the Freewell Mavic Mini filter kit, I'll leave some links down below. And as always, stay creative and just be you. Have fun.